and thanks for tuning in to episode 58 of the Matt O-Scale Trainz podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Suzuha, and with me as always are, of course, my co-hosts. And we got Johnny and Matt R. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing good. Nice to have you back on the show, Matt.
Yeah, finally I don't have to work today, so that's good. I missed the last couple ones with the Lionel catalog, and unfortunately I do wish I could have done that, but I had to work, and got to make money to buy trains somehow, like a little Class A, right, Johnny?
I mean, working? No. The
Work,
podcast
yeah.
is your job. You do this 24/7.
So I wish I could. Let me tell you, if there's a time to do it, I want to know. But what can you do? What's up,
welcome
man?
back.
How you doing?
Welcome back, Matty Z. So
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the warm welcome, guys.
How about a cold welcome?
What, the cold welcome? Yeah.
I'll give you a cold welcome. There you go.
I'm excited. Well, two things. I'm excited about tonight's topic, which I'll let you announce. But other than that, it's good for us to have a nice little trio conversation about a topic. Bringing us back to our roots, our Matt roots again. So I'm kind of excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I think this will be fun. We haven't done one of these in quite a while. Johnny, what do you think?
I know.
I think I was just a listener before we last did something like this.
Yeah, it might have been something like that.
What was the last topic I discussed about this? Like smoke fluid, I think?
Yeah, the last one was something like this. Yeah, I think it was smoke fluid. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I was not even a host back then. That was before we even went to York for the first time with Matt and I. So, yeah, long time ago.
Oh, yeah. Well, so this will be a lot of fun. So, tonight, we'll start off with doing our little bit of maintenance items, all that sort of deal, and then we will return. Before we get going with tonight's episode here, we'll just hit some of our basic maintenance items, and then we'll move on to the show for tonight. So, as always, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, of course, that's our home base, YouTube, as well as Amazon Music. We also, of course, have the Discord server, which is now beyond 200 members, and it's quite the happening place. It's just something that we've talked about a lot on the show as a community aspect, and just something that's always really great. It's a public Discord, so anyone can join it. We'll throw a link in the description of the video here. And because this is a public Discord, you will have to acknowledge that you read the rules, as this is a community server. Great group of moderators, of course, including us three hosts. And so we always make sure that everybody is treated with respect and is very safe in our community here. We have a new URL for the podcast, and that would be mnmpodcast.com. Find us there. All right, so then lastly, we'll talk about our Matt and Matt merchandise. So if you want anything with our logo on it, be it, a button, a coffee mug, a sticker, a hat, whatever, you can go to redbubble.com and you can look up Matt and Matt, and you will be able to find us there.
Before we start, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Trainz.com. If you are looking for a great deal on used and new model railroading products and want top-notch service, then please head over to Trainz.com, where they have over 120,000 products with new ones added every day. You can also sign up for their newsletter to see newly listed and newly discounted products and receive advance notice of upcoming promotions. Now, I've been using Trainz.com myself as well as my co-hosts, and we highly recommend them to our listeners.
Now, if you're like us and you're always on the lookout for your next engine, join the Trainz Rewards program to earn points on every purchase and unlock future discounts. And if you're an avid collector and want first dibs on new items, sign up for the private car membership to get early access to new listings, earn 5 points per dollar spent, and unlock great benefits like no questions asked returns.
Now, guys, don't forget that you'll need parts to keep your engines and cars operating smoothly. And to do this, Trainz has a collection of 15,000 plus parts available on their website for any item you may need. And also, if you're interested in downsizing your collection or know someone who is unfortunately leaving the hobby, Trainz also buys collections. So head over to sellmytrainz.com to get a quote. And Trainz makes it easy to sell your collection.
Now, if you do plan on buying from them, please use our affiliate link which is www.trainz.com/MMOP. You can also use our unique one-time promo code MMOP for $10 off a single purchase on the Trainz.com website.
All right, so in tonight's episode, we're going to do one that was a listener request. And this is kind of something that we kind of threw around the idea of, we have all these, topics that we've been putting in a separate little chat in our Discord server for us hosts. And, figure, what, why don't we do one of them? So we got the first one in a bunch of topics here, and it is from user Bradfish3000. And it reads as follows. I have a episode topic suggestion. As a guy who went from Fast Track to Lionel and Menard's Tubular, I think an episode about track manufacture, pros and cons would be an excellent topic. So, well, Brad, here we go. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to kind of go over the various brands of track that are out there in the O-scale marketplace. Now, some of these brands have gone away with time, and a couple of them you'll be able to recognize. But I think this will be a lot of fun. I've worked with a bunch of different brands of track. Right now, I'm actually in the middle of transitioning track. Right now, I'm going from Lionel Fast Track to Ross and Gargraves. I'll talk about that later on. And so I think this will be a lot of fun. What do you think, guys?
I actually don't buy track, Matt. I actually hand lay all of my track and hand spike it. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, there are people that do that. And I tell you, that is a feat. I could never do that.
No.
But it just looks fantastic when it's done. I envy the people that have the time to do that.
They're very much a 2-rail thing to do. Nothing wrong with that.
Very much.
I just don't have the patience. I just like buying track. It's easy.
Me too.
It's much simpler for me. But yeah, it's gonna be cool. I played around with my fair share of track, building my layout, and learned a couple things here and there. So we'll see. How about you, Matt R? I know you got some new track and layouts recently.
I did, and I'm actually excited to talk about it because it's the first time I've actually bought track for myself that's not tubular and not fast track. So actually, it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool to discuss this topic, which, thanks to our community for, giving us topics to discuss, especially something like this, which, we're not experts on all lines of the track, but we'll definitely give you our opinion. And we know enough people, I think, to give a good, I would say, honest answer about, how we feel about each kind of different styles of track. And there's some track that you just throw in the trash can, right, Johnny?
You spike it into the trash can.
Yes, you do, and I know what track you're referring to, and I completely agree. But we'll get to that later.
Let's get back on track, right, Matt?
Yes, let's go do it. Okay, so what we're going to start off with is the various brands of track, and then we will go from there. So let's start. So the brands of track are as follows. We have the good old classic Lionel, now made by Menard's, tubular track. And Lionel stopped making the tubular track a number of years ago and has since brought the tooling over to Menard's. So they're now producing it. They're also producing it in varying sizes of curve track, which I believe Lionel never did. I think they only did 31, 42, 54, 72, something like that. And then I think Menard's has brought it up to the, 96. I think they have something like that. So you get a lot more wide radius curves, which is good for, people who want like a tin plate style layout. You can do that. We have another one from Lionel. It's actually two more, but we'll go with this one first, which that is going to be Lionel T-Rail track. And that was made, actually I told the guys about this before we started tonight, was they were both kind of unsure exactly what that was. So that was made for the very early scale stuff that they made, the original 700E and the B6 switcher was made for those engines to make them look more realistic. The rail shape was different, and it also used fish plates, which are little bolts and nuts with this little Allen wrench that you connected the track with, and it looked very good. but Lionel eventually stopped producing that, and it just kind of went on to the sunset. And that track, you might not think track is kind of expensive. I mean, it is, but this track is pretty good for today's dollars. It's quite expensive when you find it. Next up, we have Super track, and this was made in the mid post-war years. I believe around the 60s when they came with all like the space set and stuff like that. They wanted a nicer, more realistic looking track than the tubular track, and it kind of goes on the heels of what would eventually become the Ross track, that sort of deal. I look at Ross as, a modern Super O, at least that's how I personally look at it. Then we have K-Line Shadow Rail track. This is kind of similar to Super O, very similar style. Then we have MTH. We have the real tracks, or if you've seen the 1998 product video, they originally called it Right Tracks. Same track, just different name. And so that's a little tidbit in there for you. So us 90s fans, there you go. But that's a good track. My buddy Richie, he uses it. And it's a very good track system. Nothing wrong with it. Then we have another track system from MTH. Johnny, here we go. It's called Scale Tracks from MTH, made famous, of course, by Rich Batista and his Black Diamond Railway series, which, if you haven't seen that, that is a fantastic resource for building a layout and working with scale tracks. If you're interested in using that, that is definitely a video source to check out. Jason Stucker, JD Stucks, he's referenced that video series a number of times, and like I said, it is just a fantastic series. And Johnny, why don't you throw a little 2 cents in on scale tracks?
Yeah, sure thing. So when I got back into the hobby, maybe like a couple years ago, I remember reading this like Rail King catalogs that MT used to put out every year, and the back they'd always include like these track plans. And I remember being a kid and being obsessed with the Main Street layout, 6x10, and it's the exact reason why my layout is actually 6x10 feet, is because I was planning to build that layout, and it was built using scale tracks. So, you see in the catalog, you see the fantastic pictures of Rich Batista's layout, and, you naturally assume that it's going to be a really nice track. So, when I got into having my first job, I went out and I bought, I think, a loop of 054 track and a bunch of scrapes from a particular vendor online on the Bay. And I got the track and I was super excited. I was going to take all my fast track off and basically start from anew. I even bought like cork roadbed and all that. So I set it up and I put it together, and it was quite literally the biggest waste of $200 I've ever spent. Quite literally, I've spiked it in the trash because it's not, to me personally, in my experience, I didn't really enjoy it. It looks fantastic, one of the best looking track systems personally, but the flaw it has is that it's made of plastic. It's very plasticky outside the rails, and it uses the same technology as the real tracks, which has like the copper fingers, which is really nice in real tracks because you got the roadbed. But with scale tracks, it's nothing but just the track section. So it's a nightmare to get it together. And if you want to take it apart after that, it's just not happening. It'll break, the ties will shatter, fingers will bend, and all that stuff. And I bet Matt can attest because I've made him try to put the track together before. It's not that great. And the thing for me personally that kind of, maybe I just had a really bad batch, which I'm gonna assume that's probably what happened. Bought a circle of 054. I think it's supposed to be like 15, no, it was like 16 pieces supposedly to make a circle of 054. They only gave me 15 pieces, but it took me 14 pieces to make a circle that didn't quite match up because it would overlap rather than being too tight. It was just a whole nightmare. And I ran it by the hobby shop that I bought it from, and they didn't know what was wrong with it. I called into MTH. They didn't know what was wrong with it. So it was just a mess. There's really not there's no consistency that I liked about it. Fantastic track. If you have the patience and the know-how to get it to work, then power to you. But to a person like myself who just likes something that's robust out of the box and I can take apart, put together, and be fine with it. It's kind of experiment, build my layout. Not for me. But hey, if you can make it work, by all means, I'm very envious because it's a beautiful track system. It just doesn't have the reliability that I'm looking for.
Oh yeah, and my grandpa, he's got a big layout that he did with. He originally started with Ross, and then somehow he got talked into scale tracks after watching Rich Batista of all people. And I don't really know all the whole story, but it is a royal pain to work with, and I'm just gonna be blunt with this. Uh, it is very much you need to take your time and work with the kind of track. Once it's together, it is beautiful. It is a beautiful track system when it's all together. Ballast and all, it looks really nice. But to work with it, cutting it is a royal pain because, unlike some of these other systems that use like tubular all the way through, like Ross, with the scale track, it's solid all the way through, and cutting it is a nightmare. I know. I remember my dad once. I think it took him a half an hour to cut a piece of track. It was crazy. But what can you do? Some are better than others, and I think that's kind of the whole point and the reason why there's so many tracks on this list. They all do different things, and I think that's just something to know is that not every brand is for everybody, and that's why there's choices out there. So keeping with the theme, we have a couple tracks from Atlas. Speaking of solid rail track, we have Atlas 21st Century track, and that one's pretty popular. I've seen a lot of people use that one. I think that one, and then Ross and Gargraves, I think are probably the two most non-road bedded track that you can find. Just very popular. As I said, I've seen a lot of people use it. And then also from Atlas, we have a road bedded track. And also, I should mention here while we're on the topic, is the right tracks / real tracks from MTH. That did have a road bed on it, and it came as like a gray color with the road bed on it. So that one, the Atlas O Industrial Rail track, which was basically in their starter sets. They never really did too much with that. I had a little bit of it at one point, but just never did anything with it. It was very limited curves. I think it was only like 036. I think was the only curves that ever came in.
They also pretty much look almost exactly like Fast Track, don't they?
Very, very close. The road bed is a very similar color. The track I think is the same width. Interestingly, it's not the same diameter when you put it together.
Yeah,
it's a lot wider. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it was a different size. I don't know, but that was a interesting little track system. Very, very short lived. But what can you do? Then we have probably of the two, probably the more popular, I would say, depending who you ask. The second road bedded track of the day. I'm sorry, third road bedded track of the day. I can talk. Is the Lionel Fast Track, and that's one that all three of us have had a great experience with. Maybe in air quotes, I don't know. We're going to find out later on. But that's a track system that is very, very popular with the road bedded community. If you just want to throw track up and go, the real tracks or the fast track is definitely the way to go. You can throw track together, use it for a bit, change your mind, whatever. Those two are probably the easiest of the bunch to do stuff like that with. When you're planning, it's honestly probably not a bad idea to maybe look into a track like that and then maybe graduate as your tastes and maybe budget allow for you to do that. Then lastly, we have two that are interconnected to each other and are used very much in the same fashion. We have Ross Custom Switches and Gargraves, and they're both the same style track. Ross uses a little bit different connection than Gargraves does. Ross uses actual spikes on their track, a little bit different radii between the two, but by and large, they're mostly the same, and they're used very much interchangeably with each other. I've mainly seen people do Gargraves sectional track and then Ross switches. I've seen the other way too. Ross, all Ross, or Ross track with Gargrave switches, or all Gargraves. There's plenty of ways to do it. That's two brands that are basically you could pick either one, and they'll work just fine. But that is very much a hobbyist track. I actually just bought a Dremel last week, the first Dremel I've ever owned. I needed it to cut track, and I've never had to cut track before until I had Ross, and that's just the way they do it. Their tracks are interesting lengths, 37-inch straights, and little filler pieces that are like 6.2 inches, 12.4 inches, very weird size, but it is a hobbyist track, and there's also more involved into that, and we will get into that in a little bit. Okay, so now that we got the various brands of track out of the way and the kind of little bit of synopsis on that, we will go to our own personal opinions on the tracks we've used. Not all of these, because like I said, not all of us have used every single brand on this list, but we have our few that are used between the three of us, and we will all get into that. So Matt R., you want to take the reins here, buddy?
Sure. All right. So let's all jump in the Wayback Machine, and I'll kind of give you my first experience really quickly with good old tubular track from Lionel. So back when I first actually saw Lionel track, so this would have been probably at my uncle's house or my cousin's house in probably the early 80s. I was single digits. I don't know, maybe it was like 8, maybe, or 9. And I remember going downstairs in the basement, and I was like looking at this stuff, and I'm like, what is this? Is this like from an Erector set or something? Like, what the heck is this stuff? And he's like, no, that's Lionel track. I'm like, yeah, it's tubular track. I'm like, oh, wow, this is cool. And so that was my first experience with tubular track. And then when I got back into, I was into HO for a time, and, I on and off with model railroading. And when I got kind of more heavily back into it, I bought some of the Lionel starter sets, and those came with tubular track. And it's like the big rugged sets. And I built my first kind of off the ground table layout with all tubular track. And to be honest, it's very tried and true. I didn't really ever have any problems with it. I had some switches too. It doesn't surprise me that people still have tubular track today. It was easy to use. It was easy to connect. It has some very sharp corners on it. So there's, I don't want to call that a negative, but you got to be careful with it. Sometimes you can get, you can get some nasty little slices on your fingers by handling it wrong. But other than that, I've always had good experiences with tubular track. The only, counter or, my particular opinion on tubular track is that, it's not the best looking track. Like, even if you, put it on some road bed and make some ballast around it, it's serviceable. But if you're trying to like make any kind of like realistic layout, it's probably not the best choice unless you're like some kind of like master, track layer and do all this extra details to it. So, and then of course, after, I started getting more into, model railroading again, I took a break for a while and came back. And then of course, I was able to, use fast track at that point. That was starting to come into sets. I don't remember what year they cut off tubular and just started adding fast track. But I liked it. It was easy to use. And of course, today, like, my large tabletop layout is all fast track. And I think it looks really nice. It's, it is easy to detail. If you can add some ballast on the side, you can do some painting on it if you want. You can color the rails. You can make it look very, very nice. And I'll kudos to one of our hosts here, Johnny, who kind of went ham on his fast track, and it looks very, very nice. So that's a good example of the extreme you can go to with fast track to make it like very, very nice looking and kind of like, very detailed on your layout. So, kudos to you, Johnny.
Thanks, Pat.
I didn't go as far as that. I did a little ballasting work on the side. But as far as like use, nothing but good things to say about Fast Track. It's very plentiful. You can pretty much find it at any hobby stop. Any big O scale hobby shop is going to have Fast Track. They offer all kinds of sizes, small pieces, to make those really kind of tight fits. As far as like, reliability wise, I've had to replace Fast Track over time, right? I mean, that's just it. No piece of track is going to be absolutely perfect. And there's wear and tear, right? You're constantly running engines and rolling stock over these pieces of track. And some of them are gonna just get a short or 10 to go, and it's fine. And I probably only had to replace a small handful of Fast Track over the last 10 years that I've been using it. So I've been very, very happy with it. I just did another extension to my layout, and I did all Fast Track 072 switches and curves. And yeah, everything works like it should. I've been very, very happy with Fast Track. So I think one of the benefits to Fast Track and why it, really became a strong contender is there are a lot of folks out there. When you have like roadbed integrated into your track, like Fast Track, there are a lot of folks out there with like carpet layouts and other kind of layouts where things can kind of get at the underneath your track, or, when you're talking about carpet, like, carpet can kind of get tangled up, right? And that can get tangled up in your gearing and everything else. So needless to say, Fast Track kind of has like a built-in kind of protection for underneath their track. So it provides an extra layer of protection for your kind of raised track. So you don't get carpet and other things that could collect underneath the track, especially if you have, like I said, a layout on the floor, on the carpet, maybe in the garage. So it definitely has a lot of strengths there. And then recently I decided to upgrade my subway kind of elevated track. And I was using Fast Track, obviously, for the longest time. And I had some recommendations come my way. And it was recommended that, hey, check out Gargraves. They have, really nice flex track. And I was able to check it out. And I bought some. And now I've actually taken down all of my elevated Fast Track and I replaced it with Gargraves. And I've been very happy with it. Now, it's not 100% finished. I still have to kind of mount it on the raised platforms that it has to sit on, and I have to stabilize it. But other than that, it looks fantastic. And there's always that kind of running joke of like elevated Fast Track, right? Like, so, well, what is that gravel doing up, levitating in midair? So, we've all been there before. But thanks to Johnny himself, he had recommended Gargraves to me. It's been a good experience with it. I didn't have to cut it like Matt Z. I was going to actually cut it, but then I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to use this as an excuse just to extend the elevated subway track even farther out. So it all worked out in the end. So, and hopefully, and then over the next couple weeks, I'll have some photos to post and some running videos. But as far as Gargraves goes, been very, very happy with that as well. They kind of connect, kind of like Fast Track. There's pins on one side of the track. So they kind of fit a little bit like Fast Track, except on Gargraves, it's just pins at one end and they kind of stick together. Now, they don't hold as strong as Fast Track does. Fast Track kind of locks into place where the Gargraves are longer pins. So there can be a little bit of movement there. But I mean, if you're using Gargraves, you're probably securing your track down on your table anyway. So that shouldn't really be an issue. So yeah, there's kind of my experiences, basically, tubular, Lionel Fast Track and Gargraves. And I've been very happy using all three. And hopefully one day when I do get into a bigger basement where I have a bigger layout, I'll definitely weigh the pros and cons. And even today, I might, depending on what the other guys say about their track experiences, I may go the way of Atlas, I may go the way of Ross. So who knows? But gentlemen, I will pass it back to you.
Cool. That's a pretty good story. It's kind of cool to hear. Like what you kind of been doing with track, and I mean obviously model railroad in general, but we've covered that in previous episodes. But if you want to listen to that, you can by all means go ahead. But with you'll hear my opinions later. But I think what you're doing is really cool. With and I was going to actually ask you that. If you could do it all over again, what would you pick? Matt, you can answer that, and when Johnny, after he gets done, he can answer that too.
Yeah,
what do you think?
That's actually a really great question. I think if I knew now what I knew then, I definitely probably would have went the route of Gargraves or Atlas, and then did the roadbed myself. When I first kind of stepped into doing a model railroad layout, I was very, very new, right? Even to running power and, all of the stuff that, you have to learn when you start kind of laying down track. And I chose fast track because it was better for a beginner or a starter to learn and easier to kind of fit together. And it's it's kind of an all-in-one package, right? Like the roadbed's there, you plug it in. There's Lionel accessories that I'll plug right in a fast track. So it's there's an ease of use there when compared to the other ones. But when you look visually, at Atlas and Ross and Gargraves, they're just so phenomenally awesome looking, right? You look at those kinds of track and you're kind of blown away, especially if they're detailed very well and have some nice ballasting around them. I mean, they're almost indistinguishable from the track that you see when you look out your window or walk down the street onto the real tracks, and you're like, wow, that looks great. One day maybe I'll have something like that. So yeah, I probably would have started with a more experienced looking or more detailed looking track, but I'm not sorry that I didn't. I think having the ability to have fast track available and to kind of get your feet wet a little bit with some easier to use track was definitely beneficial.
Okay, so now that we got Matt's opinion out of the way, and his observations and all that, which are fantastic, and I just want to hit on one thing real quick with the fast track, and because we'll go to Mr. Fast Track over here next, and when you detail it and you paint it and you weather it and you ballast it, you can make it look like a completely different track. And I think that's the case in point with Johnny. I've often said when you take the pictures, it's like, I can't believe you actually are using fast track. It looks like a completely different track. So, Johnny, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Matt. I guess I'll mirror what Matt R did, and kind of start from the top and go on from there. I definitely had my experiences with Lionel tubular track when I first started. Definitely not my default track system. My first track system actually was MTH Real Tracks. Really, really nice track system, very robust, very durable, really nostalgic to me with that gray roadbed. And plus, it's different from tubular and fast track because it's actually T-rail. It's got a flat rail, and for those who don't know what T-rail, it's if you take a cross section of the actual railhead, it forms a T section. So it's a flat rail on the top, and Real Tracks had that, and so did Scale Tracks as well. But going back to that, I had Real Tracks, and when I expanded the hobby, I think my father went and bought tubular track. So we had tubular track in conjunction with our Real Tracks, in conjunction with our fast track, which was oh my god, so it was like transition track into transition track into transition track. It was such a hodgepodge of just trying to make the layout a little bit longer and longer and longer. But All really nice track. The tubular track, the only problem I really had with it is being a child and not knowing any better. I got those pins jammed way too far into the railhead, and I forgot it was never to pull those pins back out because they're just too jammed, like too far into the track. But tubular's nice. It's really straightforward. It does require a little bit of maintenance to kind of get those pins to fit and do all those stuff. But for the most part, it's pretty bulletproof. I mean, you stick the track in the next piece of track and you go. And Lionel did offer tubular track for quite a long time, even when Fast Track was around. And only recently did they discontinue making tubular. And after that, Menards picked up on it to keep that line going. And you can get tubular track if you're a Midwesterner. You just go to your local Menards and buy tubular track, and for a great price too. So love tubular track. I'm definitely with Matt R on the fact it's a little bit more classic, more nostalgic a little bit for that. But I mean, if you just want some track to throw Trainz on and run, it's perfectly good track for that, especially if you're a classic collector. Um, I didn't really have any experience with T Rail Super O. I did get to see some K Line track. Actually, it's at a restaurant, funny enough, of all places, that I took Matt R to. Two Toots down here in Glen Ellen, Illinois. The Two Toots franchise, which is a railroad themed restaurant where they deliver your food to you on O scale or O gauge trains with flat cars with baskets on them, and they deliver your food that way. And they tend to use K line track a lot, but really, aside from that, I don't really think I've seen it in use anywhere else than there. Um, and of course, like I said, when I returned to the hobby, I used scale tracks, which had disastrous results. And I was so turned off by the entire experience that I banished my track under my layout or gave it away to somebody else to sell on my behalf for like $5 for the whole thing. And I moved over to Fast Track again because that's what I had. And the mentality was like, well, I already got this track system, so let's just run with it. And I love Fast Track. It's a great track system. It's extremely readily available. Most hobby shops will carry it for you, and you can get them pretty easily. As the guys have mentioned before, I do work on my Fast Track to make it look nicer. It looks fantastic out of the box. I love how the ties are really small. It looks great. But it does need a little bit of help if you want to go for more like a realistic look. I paint my Fast Track rails with one of those Woodland Scenics paint pens. I use particularly the Rusty Rail paint pen. Probably not the best color, but it was what was available, and I ended up painting my entire layout with that. And I actually paint the middle rail too, because I mean you're on 3 rail. Rail's there, might as well highlight it. Well, that's just me. I also ballast my track as well. And I don't just do the edge of the roadbed. I go from the side of the table, like when it meets the table, all the way up to actually the top of the roadbed on the outer portion. So I actually would put ballast in between each individual tie on the outer portion, not the inner part of the rail, the outer portion. And there were many long nights of me just sitting at my workbench, first getting the Elmer's glue spread on the individual piece of track with a Q-tip and making sure I didn't get any glue on the individual ties, pouring the ballast on that track by hand and then shaking off any excess and taking like the back of a spoon, like by the handle, and just pushing the ballast off each section of rail. And it took a long time. It took me maybe like a couple, and I've got like a 6x10 layout with 2 loops and some switches. It took me a long time to get it all done, but it was worth it. Switches were like, oh, you did one switch a night project. Hence why one of our previous guests teased me for it. Doing switches was definitely a challenge. I'd only do like one switch a night because I'm doing this all by hand. And I know our previous guest, Mike Reagan, made fun of me for it, but it takes a lot of time if you ballast Fast Track by hand and you do the process I do, where you're trying to get the ballast perfectly in between every single tie. But the look is amazing if you have the patience for it. Another thing that I love about Fast Track is that it's not really discussed that much, but with the switches, a lot of the switches you buy from some manufacturers, they have pre-wired switches or with motors, or you had to buy motors separately and add them in yourself. Different switch machines and all that other such. which is fantastic. But for me, I don't have the wiring capability or know-how or patience, more accurately, to do something like that. I like something I can just buy out of the box and just slap and let and get going. So Fast Track's great for that, especially with the newer Fast Track switches that are command control. If you have a legacy base or a TMCC base or what have you, you can just, or legacy specifically, you can just press and hold a little button on the side, program that number into your switch, into your remote, and you can remotely control the switch. No wires needed. You can just plug it in, ready to go. And those switches are idiot proof. And I'm, god dang it, I'm an idiot, and I prove that it works.
I was going to add that too. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, really quick, just so we don't get off topic on the Switch, but what's really nice too, because I'm glad you brought that up, Johnny, is the anti derailment feature in there. So if you got a piece of rolling stock or an engine coming from the opposite way, and the switch is thrown in the wrong direction, it'll automatically throw itself to the right position, so your track does not fly off the rails.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely had my fair share of cases where the auto the auto switch definitely helped me, because I would switch a train from the inner loop to the outer loop, and then it would go around again, and I forget the switch is set against it, and it would automatically take care of it for me. It's definitely it helps to catch any oopsies in your layout. But yeah, I love the fast track system. It's very rugged, it's very durable. And one of the things that I do with my stuff that kind of stands out to what most folks do is fast track. I actually bank my curves, which to some folks might sound insane, because that's something you'd see mostly for Gargraves, Ross, Atlas, and all that other stuff. But I bank my curves, which I use 060, but it still looks fantastic. And if you want to see examples of that, you can check out my YouTube, or you can check out my Instagram for that. But the way I banked my curves was using the Midwest cork. The O-scale cork I split in half and line the outer edge of my curve with Midwest cork roadbed, and then I shim the other side with bits of cardboard at each joint. So because it's fast track sectional, wherever each joint on the fast track would meet, I'd put a piece of cardboard there. That way the track doesn't necessarily flex. And it's a lot of experimentation of playing around and getting the right heights and such, with different bits of cardboard and shimming and stuff like that. But the results are amazing. I love watching a passenger train zoom by at high speed on a bank curve. It just looks fantastic. It adds that level of realism that you don't usually see in O scale with stuff like that. Not many folks bank their curves, and even more so, you rarely see people do it with fast track. But I remember being very inspired by JD Stux's layout, and seeing my buddy Sean. He was actually the first person I saw here in the Chicago group, or little Chicago group here, that has banked their curves. So, a lot of big inspiration to those guys. But yeah, I really enjoy fast track. I really can't recommend it enough. It's been awesome for me, and like Matt said, I had to replace a bit here and there, but that's the nice part about fast track. It's sectional. It's not like you're cutting out a whole area flex track or something like that. You're my 10-inch straight isn't working properly. Okay, just go to the hobby shop, buy a 10-inch straight, swap it, boom, you're done. It's very, very beginner friendly. But and then kind of moving on to the other side of things is track systems I've seen other people have, but I'd love to give a shot in future. Atlas and Gargraves and Ross. Atlas track, I actually just came back from a trip to my buddy Isaac's house, O-Scale Every Day, on our Discord. He invited me and Jason to go over there. Jason had to go visit him, and he is exclusively Atlas. And that track system is fantastic. It looks great. It works fantastic. And I really would love to have Atlas on our future layout. I remember growing up watching TM's promotional video they did for Atlas's track system. It's on a VHS. That dates me by any dates how old that video was. I bet you Matt Z also watched it at some point, knowing him being the big TM nut that he is.
But I have not.
You have not?
I haven't watched it. I've watched the 98 on VHS, though. I've watched that on VHS. I had the tape. I remember when I wore out that tape. I remember the day I did that.
You don't wear out the tape. I didn't know you could do that.
I wore out the tape in the 98 product video VHS. I wore out the tape. But No, I have not seen that. Actually, I didn't even know it existed until the last couple days. I think you were mentioning on Discord call, and I'm like, man, I gotta go watch that.
Yeah, it was. Do you remember that? Because TM in their videos had this layout that was built exclusively out of Atlas 21st Century track. It was like 2 or 3 big loops, and then there was that figure 8 in the middle. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah. With the where they did like the streamlined Steam segment.
Exactly. That was
Yeah.
a video
Okay.
they used.
Yeah.
That's a promo layout, I think. I could be wrong. Our listeners can correct me. But they used that layout to promote the track system. And they kind of just retained it later on, I think. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I think Thomas, Visionary Locomotive Works. If you're listening to this, you'll be able to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
He's a big TM '90s guy like us. So, but anyways.
Yeah, no, it was a big inspiration for wanting to get Atlas track. And as much as I love it, Atlas, from what I've been told from folks who do use Atlas on their layouts, Isaac being one of them, it's very hard to get your hands on Atlas. There's a little bit of a shortage with Atlas track in the past couple of years. And then when you do buy it, it's very expensive. It's very pricey track.
Heard that
but
too.
Yeah. So I'd love to get into it, but I think it's kind of thing where you kind of got to start preemptively collecting it before your next layout. But yeah, it's fantastic. It looks great, and I know folks have been using it. I mean, Eric Siegel's a big example. He's been using Atlas track on his layout for a very long time, and bless him, Jason Stucker, he's been weathering his. He spent the past couple weeks weathering his, and it looks fantastic.
Just the tape alone he used on that was crazy.
Oh my gosh, you could cover.
He must have used probably rolls of painter's tape to do all that.
I think he had like 2 or 3 rolls. I think he said he used. But
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's good track. I kind of prefer it over Gargraves. Personally, I like the tie spacing on Atlas better. It reminds me more of like scale tracks and fast track because I like the smaller ties. I don't really like larger ties on my layout. Not saying that it looks bad. It looks really good if you can scene it properly. But if I'm given the choice, I'd rather go with Atlas over like Gargraves. At least for the main track pieces, for switches, Ross switches and stuff like that are definitely the way to go. But yeah, really cool track systems. There's a bunch of stuff for everybody out there, and while I'm a diehard fast track supporter, you can definitely get your money's worth out of different track systems, and depending on your needs, you can either get stuff with roadbed like Fast Track and Real Tracks, or get stuff like Atlas or Gargraves. There's plenty out there for everyone.
For sure, that's a pretty cool story. All right, I'm gonna ask you the same question. Knowing what you know now, would you do anything different?
Not buy scale tracks. That's the first thing I would do.
That's a given.
I'll probably Atlas. I'd probably start with Atlas if I could redo it all over again. I think the biggest thing, don't use 060 switches past me. What were you thinking? Why didn't you just use 072?
Oh, I got a worse story for that. Wait till you hear me.
But I would definitely do Atlas with raw switches, for sure. There's no question about that.
All right, so real quick before we go on to yours truly's opinions and history and story and the whole nine, I figured that a good idea to talk about when we're talking about track is talk about curves, and more specifically curve radius or radii, however you choose to say it as. And for that, we're gonna throw it over to Matt R. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah, well, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so really quickly. We figured that if we're going to talk about track, maybe we should just have a little small segment here to talk about like radius, what that means. And, if you're building, a layout and you want to install curves, like what is probably the recommended curve? So I'm kind of known as the expert at pushing the limitations of my engines around curves. What I'm talking about is that curves for any kind of track system that you buy will come in a specific radius, right? And what that means is what is the actual curve itself of the track. If you go back to the old days of like tubular track, you're looking at like 031, 042, stuff like that. And they tended to get bigger over time, obviously, because Well, if you have a bigger engine, especially if you're running a big scale steam engine, it is not going to go through 031. It does not going to like that whatsoever. The answer to this is, well, bigger radius curves. And unfortunately, that also means that the table that you build, or the maximum length of your track plan, has to be much bigger to compensate for those curves. When I started my fast track layout, my widest curve was 048 and my inner loop was 036. And look, I thought that was big. And, I definitely got away with some stuff that I probably should have never got away with when it comes to running trains. If I knew now what I knew then, I would definitely go at least 054/060. There's no 054 in fast track. 054 is tubular. And then there's 060 in fast track. I went from 036, 048 loops to double 060 loops. And it was probably the best thing that I ever did on my layout. Like, hands down, best upgrade I ever did, because it not only allows you to run different types of, engines, meaning bigger engines, but your stuff just runs so much more smoothly through your layout. And I definitely, again, I definitely try to squeeze as much as I can through 060. I have the MTH Restoration Big Boy, and believe it or not, it does go through 060. It does it with a bit of a grin, but it does actually make it through, and it doesn't really cause me too many problems. I would run something through the track if I felt like it was causing some kind of mechanical issue, or like, tearing wires out or anything like that. But yeah, so when it comes to radius, like we said, is before you start you're building a layout, get a track plan, use a piece of software, get a notepad out, get a pen out, decide how big you're going to want it. So when it comes to fast track, when we say 048 curves, that means your layout's going to have to at least be 4 feet in length. Now, when I say
wider than that,
yeah, well, when I say that minimum, that's like where it would barely. I think that's almost like an end to end. Where is that the middle? Is that the middle rail too?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's middle rail to middle rail.
When you're doing 48, you
52,
I measured it once. It's the track from end to end is 4 inches wider. So if you got like 36, it's 40 inches.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're at 52.
Yeah. So you definitely want to add on an extra, 4 inches if you can. But believe it or not, you're probably better off adding on a little bit more than that, because the better buffer room you give your trains, especially when you're dealing with like an outside lip, the better off you're going to be, in the end. So that means if you want to install 072, you're going to probably want an 80 foot. Yeah, you want 80 feet. You're probably going to want 80 inches across to get, because number one, keep in mind that if you're putting in 072 curves, well, you might want a second 072 loop, and you're not going to get away with that if you're just going to go, hit the minimum requirement for length. So you're going to want at least like 80 to 84 inches across to put 2 072 loops in. And, obviously, if you ask anybody, they're going to tell you go 072. And that's probably a good, valid answer. You can get away with 060 for sure. If you want to be 100% certain, just go 072 or bigger, depending on how much room you got. I went 060. I'm very happy with 060. I had thought about 072, and I probably could have done it, but my problem is, and probably a lot of people run into the same problem, is the wider you make your layout, the less reach you have to the center of the layout to do any maintenance work, install buildings. Maybe if a engine comes off the track, you need to get on there and fix it, well, I'm not getting up on top of my layout ever. So that's not happening for me. So I have to be very careful, and I have to have enough room for myself to, on both sides of the layout, to be able to reach over and put something back on the track. So I think, at the end of the day, I think if you're gonna be a semi-scale person, I don't think you need any more than 048, to be honest with you. Anything in semi-scale is going to run and look perfectly fine on 048. If you do plan on going into the scale world, well, again, 072 is probably where you want to be. If you can't just inch out those extra few feet for 072, then I think 060 again would be perfectly fine for you. And Johnny can attest for that too, because Johnny also has 060 curves.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there, Matt. If you're gonna move over to building a layout or expanding a layout, if you really can't do 072, 060 has been tried and true for me. You can run quite a lot with 060. There's very little that I haven't been able to run 060. I think Matt, you and I've only encountered like one set that won't do 060. But yeah, no, I have articulated in my layout. What have we run on my layout? We've run the AC9 on the layout. We've run the MT Restoration Big Boy on the layout. Heck, I run my Restoration Big Boy on my inner loop on my layout. Even with that humongous overhang in 060, it still works fine. We ran the MT Premier Challenger on my layout, the Legacy Class A that I had in my latest video. That runs fine in 060 on both loops. You can get away with quite a lot, and it helps a lot too. The nice thing about 060, it's a nice sweet spot in between. To me, what I thought were the two curve radiuses, like the big ones, were 054 and 072. It's right in that nice sweet spot. Engines like Berkshires and Northerns are gonna run perfectly fine in 060, and they're gonna have that little extra leniency than you would get over 054. But it's not quite 072, so it doesn't take up nearly as much space. So definitely worth getting, and also you might be able to get it for a little bit of a better price too. 072 is a radius that is very much in high demand all the time. With 060, you might be able to get it for cheap because not many people are looking for 060. I remember I got my 060s track from Trainz back in the day for an absolute steal, a whole box of it for under $100. So definitely a little bit of price saving you can get there too. But yeah, if you can push your curve limits to to be a little bit wider, it's definitely worth it. You'll have a much more enjoyable running experience, and it really broadens your horizons to what you can buy. I mean, when I met Matt R, he was Mr. Only diesels. I don't think you had many steam engines, and if then they were like Atlantics or smaller.
Yep.
And now look at you now with big boys, Challengers in past. So yeah, definitely with you on that one. Definitely go for 060 if you can. You'll thank yourself later. Or 72, of course, do 072 if you can fit it. But if you're restricted on space, like I've got a 6-foot wide table. I did 060 double loops, and it works fine for me.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the engine that wouldn't, the said engine that wouldn't go around, is actually not even a steam engine. It is my Pioneer Zephyr, my Lionel Pioneer Zephyr TMCC, the diecast one, which unfortunately, where the trucks are, there's that lip that kind of comes over it from the shell, and it won't turn the axle far enough to, smoothly go through an 060 curve. It definitely screams for 072. So kind of funny that it was ended up being a one of the greatest diesel engines, to ever streamline diesel engines that there ever was, and it hates me.
You were so excited you got rid of your MTH one, and you were ready for the Lionel one, and you just couldn't run it.
Yep, but the MTH one does work because it has different. The skirts on the truck are part of the truck and not part of the shell, so they will let you go through 060.
There you go. I think another thing to remember too is with some of these engines, steam wise,
it's not usually the engine that won't do the turn. It's usually the tender.
Good point.
The centipede tenders are ones that'll get caught depending on how a manufacturer handles them. For example, there are certain engines where I think the FEF is one. Don't quote me on that. The Lionel FEF will do a radius of 54. The MTH FEF or other other UP engines with centipede tenders, all the wheels are flanged opposed to the blind wheels on the Lionel ones. So Lionel centipede tender technically will do a smaller radius than an MTH one. It's stuff like that, or like a New York Central engines have that issue. So it's definitely something you want to keep in mind if you are going to be testing the limits of a tighter curve radius. But that's just my own personal experience.
Yep, that's a really good point, Johnny.
Well, I think that's all I've got to say on curves. Unless Matt R or Matt Z, you guys want to throw something in there before we pass the mic over to Matt Z for his section here.
No, I don't have anything, and obviously, if you do have a question about curves or you're starting out, you need some help. Shameless plug here. Join the Matt Discord server, and we got plenty of guys in there, from guys who use 031 to guys that use bigger than 072, and everyone's really, really helpful when it comes to folks starting out and reaching out and need help. So again, please feel free to go in the Discord server, ask that question about track, and there'll be more than enough people to help you out and point you in the right direction for sure.
Absolutely, I think that that's a good way to go. And I'm thinking on this is, and I'll talk about this in a second. But it's like when you're doing a layout, always like you guys said, try to do the biggest you can, because you'll thank yourself later. And if you truly can't fit it, then do the next best you can, and that's kind of what you did, Matt. Is you kind of could swing 72, but decided it wasn't a good idea, and you went with 60, and that's, hey, what can you do? It's good enough for anybody, so that's what you got. But with me, I started out, actually my dad. I said this in my when Johnny interviewed us, was my first experience with doing this was my dad. He had MTH Real Track. He had a multi-level layout, I believe 042 and 031. He had the Hellgate Bridge. I remember that. This is very early. I was probably 2 at the time. So very, very early. But he had that, moved in with my parents, with my grandparents, and they started the big layout that I have featured on my YouTube channel called the KTMR. And that I don't get to their place as near as much as I used to, but they're working on a big rebuild with their layout. Like I said, they transitioned from Ross to scale tracks, and now my grandpa and I, the Soul 2, are looking to go back to Ross the way that he originally wanted it. And it was kind of his doing that, him and I talking about it late night, playing cards, being the people that we are, right, Johnny? Doing that, talking, what do I think about, me maybe moving into Ross. So that's exactly what I did. But before we get there, we talk about fast track. So on my own layout, I have fast track on it, and I really like it. About my only complaint I have with it thus far is the noise that it gives off. It is a very loud track system. When you're running trains without any kind of sound detonation, it is a very loud track, and that's due to the roadbed being hollow all the way through. I mean, not even real tracks gives off the noise that fast track does. It is a very loud track. That's my sole criticism of it. But I started off with 036, and actually I did 036 with a 10-inch straight in between, and that had some very fun things with that. A little bit of bend and stuff in there to make it work on my now 4-foot board at the time right now, and I'm slowly working on expanding it over to 6 feet. But then I was on the forum, and I happened to find a post about doing 044.5, which it was the closest you can get to 48 on a 4-foot board. So I followed the guy's steps, and it's basically 048 on each end. And then in the middle, you have 036 half curves, quarter curves, and then a couple 048s in there. And works good. I got some bigger steamers. I've been running Northerns and Burks and stuff like that. No articulated yet. I don't have any yet. I'm working on that. But everything seems to work good. The S3 was my first big one. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be my test one. It's it's this or I don't run it. And I went ahead and did it, and it does it fine. It does kind of skip in a couple spots, but it does work, and I'm happy with it. So that's what we got. But no, now I've been working on Ross and Gargraves. Actually, my buddy Lance hooked me up with some 072 curves back in, I believe it was September of last year, and I've just finally got to get some temporary wood going so I can actually use them. It's not quite a full loop yet. It's about half a loop, but slowly getting there. Just got to do a couple structural things to finish it up. But it does work. I got a set of centipedes a couple months ago from our friend Bernsey. I did a trade with him on that, and I've been using that as kind of my test engine to test curves, test clearances, and works pretty well. I'm very, very happy with it, and I think this will be a lot of fun once I go ahead and do it. Part of me was thinking to tear this whole thing down and start over and go to 8 feet wide just to be that guy to have 80-inch curves on the outside. But I thought about it, and I expanded in the back enough to do 72, and I have successfully done that, and I think it'll work out good. My only reason to go beyond 072, and this is my personal feeling on this, is really the further you go beyond 072 is just for looks. And obviously when you're dealing with, articulated steamers and that sort of deal, the wider you go, the nicer they'll look. I mean, you put a big boy on a 100-inch curve, I mean, it'll look really, really good as opposed to an 072 or 60-inch curve, whatever the case may be. But as I said, looks, the further you go up, the better they look. But as far as running wise, 72 is good enough for anything in this hobby. I think maybe the only exception is maybe the Jean Henry from No Fucking Western, but that's a one-off engine. But anyway, that's what I got so far. Not really too much. It's going to be an 072 and 063 for the inner loop. And that'll be good enough. I'll have switches to connect them all, a little yard and passing siding and stuff like that. But basically my layout now, just with Ross and Gargraves. And like I said, they're compatible with each other. So I got a couple Ross switches with DZ1000 switch machines going into Gargraves track. And I can't use the switches yet, because I have two that are not the same style. So I need to get on that. But eventually I'll be able to have a couple loops and some Trainz running and a Class A to run them on, right, Johnny?
I don't own any non-West Coast engine. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I don't know either, but I can run that and the Centipede next to each other. So that'll be a lot of fun, but that's a little bit down the road for right now. But that's what we got. And then the question that I posed to the other guys, which I will now give my 2 cents on, had, if I could start all over again, had nothing. Honestly, I'm just going to kind of bring it a little bit beyond that. If I could start with absolutely nothing, not own a train, period, it would be a lot different collection than what I have now. That is for sure, but that's a topic for a different day. But as far as track, I would definitely do one of the non-road bitted tracks. Ross and Gargraves is probably number one, just because of the ease of use. Like I said, with the it does follow some cutting, but that was something that I knew going into this, that I knew I would eventually need a Dremel. Like I said, so I bought one last week, and it works pretty good. It's a kind of a hard one to get used to. My hands are a little shaky. I found that out rather quickly. I was actually messaging Matt about it. I'm thinking, Matt, what do I do? And he's like, I don't know. So he gave me some things, and I got it to cut, and it worked out pretty well. But there won't be the last piece I'll have to cut for sure. And then I'll definitely look into the flex track because I'll need that at a later date. But yeah, that's what we got. I'm really excited to do it, and I'll definitely keep everybody updated on the Discord and all that sort of thing. I will also do the road bed. I'm going to buy the Woodland Scenics foam road bed. We're going to give that a try. I've never used that either. I've used cork before, but not the foam stuff. So I don't know what to expect, but we'll take a look at it and see. My one thing, though, that I will probably do to Ross, this track that I have, is I probably will end up weathering it just because the shiny silver rail on it is quite an eyesore. But that's that. And real quick, then I'll be done here, is on tubular track. And like I kind of said, that Ross is kind of like a more modern Super O track in that kind of sense. But if I was doing a like a post-war style layout, it would be without a doubt to use real tubular track, whether it's the reproduction or the original stuff from the 60s or 50s, whatever. That just screams, that's the stuff to use. I've often thought, sitting down here late at night thinking, what would it look like if I did a Christmas theme layout? Maybe a separate little section off my main board, and did a Christmas, line up post-war layout, that sort of deal. And I would definitely do it with true tubular track, just because it would just be nostalgia as all get out, and I just think that would be a ton of fun. But that's all I got, and that's what we got going for tonight. Guys, any closing thoughts before we call it a night?
I think when it comes down to it, everyone should use the track. You've heard us talk about our opinions on what track looks like, the track that we use, our suggestions. But when it comes down to it, do your own little bit of research and use the track that you think looks the best for you. And if that ends up being tubular, so be it. If you like fast track, go with fast track. If you like some of the higher quality, ones that, have the ties and don't have the built-in road bed, go for that as well. So, and when everything comes down to it, it's your layout, it's your imagination, and you do what looks best for you, and it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks, right? But hopefully you can take what we discussed tonight back with you and just use that as, hey, now I have a little bit more knowledge about track and radius, and I'll put that into some of the thought when you either decide to maybe you're starting a new layout, maybe you're upgrading a layout, or maybe you're so advanced that you're beyond what we said tonight, and you're the king of track. But that's okay. That's okay too. But I just, again, use the track that fits you the best.
Johnny, go ahead.
The same thing as Matt. Just kind of choose the track system that works best for you, and just don't be afraid to experiment. Developing track is quite literally the foundation of your layout. Is what your train's on, and it's definitely something you want to do your research on, and definitely not something you want to skimp out on. If you don't have good track, and then you're not going to have good operations with your trains. And making sure you take the time to lay that track properly, to wire it properly, and to choose the best one for your particular layout is super important. So definitely take a look, see what resources you have, and don't be afraid to ask people. I wish I would have done that when I bought scale tracks, because I would have learned to avoid it like the plague. So, but yeah, for sure. Hopefully this helps some folks out there who are considering switching track systems, trying to buy a new track system, or maybe this is confirmed that you did get the right track system for yourself. So that is my 2 cents. How about you, Matt?
No, I think that this is definitely very good information. If you're starting out, Matt, we should make a playlist. I don't know if there's a way to do that. We should make a playlist about all of our, layout building episodes. and link them or do something with them so everybody can have a resource as to what, if they're looking to start a layout or building one or whatever. Could look into that. We'll have to see if there's a way to do that.
Sure, we could do that. Yeah, I'm sure
yeah.
I'm sure we can do something like that on the Discord.
Oh yeah, I think that would be good. And real quick, one thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about this was on my fast track switches. Johnny talked about earlier about buying 060 switches, and I did something even worse. I bought 036 command switches, and the command switches are fantastic, but not biting the bullet and just buying the 072 switches was a huge mistake, and I deeply regret that. But you know what? What can you do? You live and learn. And sometimes, asking questions and kind of figuring things out, on your own and all that sort of thing, may come to bite you. But, if you got resources, like Johnny said, use them. And this is something that Eric Siegel often says when he does, tutorials on things that can have kind of high opinions is, don't take what we've said here as a rule book for doing track. Take a track system that you like, that looks good enough for what you want to do, a radius that you like, whatever it be. If you don't got the room for big, don't do big. If you want to do road bed on the carpet, go ahead. Road bed carpet 031. Nothing wrong with that by any means. If that's all you got room for, hey, go ahead, have fun. But, kind of take what you can from this and our other layout building episodes and, cherry pick ideas and make them your own, bring them to your own needs. And if you need help, you can email us, throw us on the Discord, chat on Facebook, whatever the case may be. And, we can also get some discussion going in the forum post for this. I will link actually in the forum post for this, and I'll remind Matt to do it in the show notes. I will link a couple links. I'll have him throw Derek's episode with Steve from Ross Custom Switches. He did a podcast with him. That's one of his first ones. I remember listening to that quite a while. Actually, I might be listening to this after this call is over because that was a good episode. Derek, if you're listening to this, great episode, man. But that one, I'll link my video on command switches, because that one's a pretty popular one. And while on the topic of fast track, we'll link another buddy. We'll link Sid's Trainz. He did a video on a couple things. He did a fast track double crossover, which that one was really cool. It's one of his most popular videos, I believe. That one, and we'll link his electrical one on the little short pieces. Just because you know what? It's always good to have resources out there. All right, so yeah, like I said, cherry pick what you can out of this, and if you need help, there's always people to help you. So, Matt, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on YouTube at WC Model Railroad. I'm on Facebook as WC Model Railroad, and wow, big surprise, I'm on Instagram at WC Model Railroad. So, check me out. Let me know. I've been posting videos lately and posting on Instagram and making YouTube shorts. So I'm definitely back on the content creating train here, so to speak.
Johnny?
You can find me on YouTube at Audamus. That's AUDAMUS. I just made a video recently of me highlighting the new Lionel Class A that Sid and I upgraded. So if you want to see that, check out the skits and all the fun stuff we put together for that video. It'll be on my channel. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Audamus_Trainz. And then you can also find me on Discord on the Matt Ooskill podcast server here. Usually I'm scrolling through the chats and I'm making a fool of myself in voice chat. So come on down. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And you can find myself on YouTube under Matt-Trainlover9943, Facebook under the same name, Instagram as Matts.hobbies, and like Johnny said on the Discord, having fun, usually talking with our buddy Isaac about sound files, that's the stuff we do, but that's what we do. So hope you guys all enjoy this episode, and you guys all take care, have a good one, and we'll see you for the next one.
Have a good night.